If you listen to the show, you already know that we cannot exist without our sponsors. They are the ones who make things happen behind the scenes. So let's acknowledge Fuji Sports. We've been working with these guys for a while now, not only as far as this podcast is concerned, but also at the RŌL Academy. We've had their gear. I personally use their gis. What a phenomenal product.
Yeah, I mean, jiu-jitsu, judo, MMA, tape, bags, anything you need for your jiu-jitsu journey, you can find at fujisports.com.
Let's talk RŌL TV. There's so much content on there. It's ridiculous at this point. But I think what is even more intriguing, as time went on during the project, we've been recording most of the events that were taking place here at RŌL Academy. At this point, I mean, we have guys like Chris Howder, Armin Fati, Rafael Lovato Sr., and Pete the Greek. I mean, there were so many different events that we've kind of recorded it. Don't you think that's amazing? I mean, points of reflection and kind of going back for all the students to see what really happened and refresh their memory.
Yeah, I think it's great, you know, being able to go back and look at all these high-level practitioners, Octavio Cudo, like one of the names you didn't mention. And I mean, just these guys that have been doing this for so long come in, teach these amazing seminars and workshops, and it's all recorded and there for you to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to get additional savings on all this, type in code RŌL Radio at the coupon and get additional 30% off of your membership.
Nice. Go to RŌLAcademy.tv. What's up, everyone, and welcome back. If you haven't already, please remember to hit the like, share, subscribe, download, listen, and whatever other button there is, and leave a review wherever you do listen. That ensures that we can continue bringing you the great guests and amazing content that you have come to expect. Today's guest is another true martial artist. With a background in several martial arts, it was his exposure to jiu-jitsu in 1989 when he knew he had found what he really wanted to do. It did take a few years before John Frankl started his formal training, first under Rickson Gracie, and after moving from the West Coast to Boston, John trained under Roberto Maia and received his black belt in 2002. Here's the RŌL Radio with the owner of John Frankl Jiu Jitsu, coach for Straight Blast Gym, professor of journalism and international studies at Yonsei University, and the man who first introduced BJJ to South Korea, John Frankl.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we are live.
Here we go.
Number 163.
Really?
I'm still,
I stopped paying attention.
No, you know what? I don't pay attention until I write down in my notebook the number of episodes, who is it with, the date, and then it really sinks into me with that. After 160 plus of guests and conversations, we are still doing this. And I still remember, what's his name?
So you don't remember?
Yeah. This is going places. This is going places from BJJ Fanatics and my
Bernardo?
No, the podcast guy.
I'm gonna let you gringo. I'm gonna let you suffer. I'm gonna let you suffer.
How am I forgetting his name?
Ryan.
Ryan. That's right. Ryan. Yes. My apologies, Ryan, officially on the air. I'm totally embarrassed right now. But I remember when he said that typical podcast carries over for 7 episodes, and on 100 plus 60, we still hear.
His episode with us was 153 episodes ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No, 113 episodes
ago.
Yeah.
It's been a while. But listen, I guess that's the testimonial that we enjoy doing this. We enjoy talking to people, and that's a big part of it. Well, you don't talk, I do. I like talking to people.
I like listening.
You like listening. You get the first seat.
Yes.
You get the first seat.
I get to hear all the original stuff.
You get the VIP seating. So everything good on your side?
Yeah, everything's great. It's been busy around here. Busy morning, putting in... we got some new mats that came in, and we're excited about that. Can't wait to get all that straightened out. So it's going to be fun once all that gets underway.
It's always interesting to me when jiu-jitsu individuals bridge in from other martial arts, you know, like when they have, and we had several of those guests when they start in other martial arts flavors or disciplines or just other areas, and then jiu-jitsu came along somewhere in 70s, 80s, 90s, or whatever along the way, right? And that conversion takes place. And today is not any different. John, welcome to the show. Thanks for hanging out with us today and giving us a bit of your life and sharing some of your vision and philosophy with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And again, sorry for the hiccup on the last one. I was traveling, and it was just the logistics were difficult. Yeah.
No, it's all good. We glad to have you here. And what's interesting is, I was saying a moment ago, you do come from more of a traditional martial art background at the beginning of all of this. Do you find yourself as a true martial artist having the exposure of different areas of this umbrella of martial arts, which jiu-jitsu fits into it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in the early days, especially when jiu-jitsu was not that popular and not that big, in other words, there were only a few academies outside of Brazil. I think like the first generation were largely people who were doing martial arts, were looking for something more effective, and probably like myself thought they had found the most effective thing available. But as always, as information changes, our opinions have to change, right? As the data changes, we should be, as sort of martial artists and scientists, we should be always open to revising our opinions if the data is changing. And so I had been exposed to jiu-jitsu in 1989 actually, and I automatically knew that it was what I wanted to do, but I was still in graduate school in Korea, and so I had to wait until I finished my schooling in Korea and moved back, and then I started. But it seems fairly typical, I think, in the first generation. Maybe I'm like the 1.5 generation. I'm not sure, having started in the 90s instead of the 80s. But yeah, for sure, I don't think it's atypical. And now there's jiu-jitsu schools on every corner, and so it might be your first martial art now, but not back in the day.
Yeah, and you're right. Today, for an average individual who is seeking that experience, jiu-jitsu probably would be one of the first martial arts, simply because of the saturation that we are experiencing, especially in the larger cities all around the country. Talk a little bit more about this pre-98 experience. What martial arts are you dipping into? What are you exposed to?
Yeah, so I was into martial arts since I was very young, and I lived in Santa Cruz, California. It's a small town, and so there wasn't many choices. So I was doing something that was sort of half Japanese, half Korean karate. I mean, they called it karate, but some of their instructors had been Japanese and some of their instructors had been Korean. And before Taekwondo started becoming its own sport and trying to get into the Olympics, it was just basically karate. Koreans had learned karate, and they were teaching that early on, and it wasn't until later, maybe the 70s or 80s, that it started to develop into something separate. In any case, that's what I was doing. And then when I went to college, I went to school in Berkeley. It was a bigger town, and there were more options. And I did Kuksulwan, which is kind of like Hapkido. And the reason I did it, specifically the way they advertised it, was kind of like MMA. Like, when we're far away, we kick, and then when we're closer, we punch. And then when we're in clinch range, we have grappling, and then we go to the ground. Of course, the advertising and the actual product were a little bit different, but the advertising hooked me as, like I was 17, 18 years old. That's what I was looking for. It wasn't anything like mixed martial arts or even jiu-jitsu, but it was more complete than what I had been doing, right? It had more elements than what I had been doing. So that attracted me. When I've been doing that, oh, go ahead.
So at that point, do you feel like you're fulfilling this martial art satisfaction in a sense that you found something more complete? And again, this is before jiu-jitsu, right? At that point, you have no comprehension what jiu-jitsu is, right?
Correct.
So do you find yourself like, oh, this is something different than what I've done prior to that, and I'm getting more out of this?
Absolutely. Yeah. So in that sort of environment where there was no jiu-jitsu, there was no MMA. In that environment, I probably had one of the more complete martial arts that I could have had. But that's in terms of technique. Like, they had a good variety of techniques, but of course the training methods were completely unrealistic. And so, you'll have people in Aikido or Hapkido, and they'll see jiu-jitsu and they'll say, we have that, and we do that, and we have that, and we do that. And they're partially right. Like in a photograph, if you just took a photograph of the technique, you would see, the way they're hyperextending the elbow, for example, looks similar in a photo. But of course, in a training environment, there's zero resistance. It's all choreographed. And so nobody ever really gets good at applying that in a real situation. So, so the short answer is yes. It was certainly with my limited knowledge at the time, I was much more satisfied with that than I had been with just kicking and punching. Yes.
Why do you think that traditional martial arts, what you are talking about, they do speak of some of those things that we use in jiu-jitsu today? And actually, like, doing some research and really reading about other traditional martial arts, arm locks and joint manipulation, wrist locks, all that is available actually as part of the system. But oftentimes they are not exposed to the students for various reasons. I'm curious if you ever found what was the source of that reasoning, why this is not being taught.
Yeah, so I think I have to answer that in two parts. In the martial arts that are more striking and they're more based on forms, kata and forms, when they do bunkai in Japanese, which is a kind of analysis or a breakdown, they talk about, this motion that I'm doing in the air is actually an arm lock, and this motion that I'm doing in the air alone is actually a takedown. But that's ridiculous. It's a kind of post facto analysis of what it might be against another person. But if you never have another person in front of you, and especially someone resisting you, it's 100% impossible that you can ever functionalize that, right? And then the second reason is the instructors themselves never learned it. So it's not that my instructors knew how to grapple, but wanted to keep it a secret from me, like a kung fu movie. Like, I had to prove myself for 20 years, and then they would teach me how to really do an arm lock and how to really do a choke. They never learned it. It was never there. I mean, I don't know if it was there hundreds of years ago, but in all the traditional martial arts that I've seen, it just, the instructors don't know. They also learn all of these things with zero resistance and completely choreographed. So they're not holding the students back as much as just teaching the very limited curriculum that they were taught.
Well, and I would imagine that result of that is we are seeing today, right? I was actually reading an interesting article recently, a couple months ago, is that if you look at the true traditional martial arts, the origins of it, a lot of them have actually grappling concepts embedded into them, but as an evolution taking place over hundreds of years, those have been forgotten, removed, intentionally or unintentionally, but they simply dissolved from the system. And as a result of it, we are seeing what we're seeing today. And then there is this jiu-jitsu popping up in 90s or 80s. And it's like, whoa, this thing is very different. And then we see this black and white perspective of these martial art, very drastic comparison. And then obviously, what we are experiencing today in 23 is the result of all of this. What were your thoughts on that?
I was thinking about, if you talk about traditional martial arts, there's two ways to look at it. Really, traditionally, if you were training people to go to war, before firearms, you would have swords and knives and axes. And if I had a sword, a long sword and a short sword or knife in my belt, or an axe on the other side of my belt, it wouldn't really make that much sense for me to spend hours and hours training unarmed techniques, lying on my back, developing the guard and things like that. The I'd want to be on my feet, cutting people's heads off with a long sword from as far away as I could, or even better, shoot them from even farther away with a bow. And after firearms, shoot them from either farther away with a firearm. And grappling would be, okay, they got too close. I want to put them on the ground with me on top, kind of a knee on belly type situation or mounted situation, and then pull out my short sword and stab them in the throat. So, just sitting around on your back for hours and hours and hours developing tricky guard games and things would not exist. So there'd be a different type of grappling with a different emphasis. And then once people started doing martial arts, for fun and for health and for sport and for unarmed self-defense, we get something like the original version of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What Harriott and Rickson and everyone were bringing over in the 80s. And now, it's kind of full circle. It's people, the Gracie Academy and Rickson, Henry Akins, the people at SBG are doing a very good job of preserving that. I won't say original, because who knows what the original looked like, but that 1970s, 1980s version of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was mostly, there weren't really many tournaments, so it was mostly for fighting other martial arts, like the original UFC. But the majority of schools have gone to sport jiu-jitsu, which is fine. I love watching sport jiu-jitsu. The really good athletes and really hyper specialized. But I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I've actually gotten away from the original question. But I think there's been a kind of full circle, even within jiu-jitsu. The difference is, I think, since there's no Olympic jiu-jitsu like there's with judo or with taekwondo, there's still a good position for SBG or the Gracie Academy, Henry Rickson, all these people. There's still a big demand for that, because I think that was the original attraction that people had to jiu-jitsu, and not everyone wants to lose that.
What you're talking about essentially is the diversity of rules of engagement, if you will. Like if you look at the samurai way before weapons, everybody's stabbing each other. The rules of engagement are very different than we look at 2023 and IBJJF Worlds. I mean,
yes,
it might be the same umbrella of the art that we are talking about, but because of the rules of engagements have changed, the adaptation of the environment needs to happen. Otherwise, we can't have this competition. We can't have this conflict. Right. As a result of it, we are not succeeding. As you were talking about the samurais and way back in the day, like all I heard that nobody's doing Baron Bellows back then. Like it would have the inversions would.
Yeah. I mean, the guard would make sense, right? If someone knocked you down and they're trying to get close enough to stab you, some kind of really combative open guard makes sense. You would put your feet on someone's hips immediately if they had a knife and were trying to stab you in the throat. Yeah. I mean, and they'd say, "Oh, I would cut your leg," and I'm sure all that happened in wartime. But again, you don't have a choice. You're the one who slipped or was taken down. I would rather someone cut my leg than I would get mounted and stabbed in the eye, right? So it's all relative.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So sometime around 1989, you stumble upon jiu-jitsu, and that's in Korea. Yes. Is that correct?
It was in Hawaii.
In Hawaii,
so
okay.
I was coming back from Korea, and I stopped in Hawaii to see a friend who we were both doing martial arts in California. We knew each other from there. He moved back to Hawaii, and he was training with Helson. Helson had opened only the second. Like Horion was the first in Torrance, and Helson opened the second in Hawaii. My friend said, "Oh, I'm doing jujitsu," and I said, "Wonderful," but I was not impressed. And he said, "Oh no, it's different." And I'm like, "How different can it be? I've seen this." And he said, "It's Brazilian jiu-jitsu." And then I was like, what does that mean? Isn't jiu-jitsu Japanese? And then he largely copying Horion just said, "Okay, let me mount you." I mean, that was Horion's introductory lesson, right? And I'm like, fine, I can get out of this. And he mounted me. And again, think about it. He's a white belt. And I, of course, you know what happened. I tried and I couldn't, and I was exhausted. And then he said, "Mount me." And then I mounted him, and he ooped on me, and I was off, in 1 second. And this is Horion's genius introductory lesson, because everyone's hooked immediately, not because it's a trick, because it's so real, like it's empirical.
Yeah.
You have data in your own body and with your own eyes, and I was like, oh, I have to learn this, right? I knew then, but I didn't actually move to LA and start training with Rickson for like 4 more years almost.
Well, so listen, talk to me about the mental state through these stages as you go through. So there is this traditional martial art, like phase 1, if you will. Then you get into this closer to jiu-jitsu stage, right? Where you are thinking like, okay, this is like more real. This is actually like applicable, right? Like I can use this stuff. Now I'm actually learning. I'm actually like bulletproof almost. Like this is happening, right? And then you end up in Hawaii and you're like, what the hell is going on here? Because I can't even sustain the top control. So what is going through your mind in these stages as you're going through this exploration?
Yeah. I have a fairly open mind. I think I try to. So it wasn't, some people, you hear stories, a lot of anecdotes about, oh, I just wasted the last 10 years of my life studying this bullshit. And people, they have like a breakdown. I wasn't like that. I was like I said, I've been introduced to new data. Now I have new opinions. Like I didn't go backwards and regret what I had done. And in fact, although those traditional martial arts were next to useless for actual fighting, they weren't really useless as physical education. Like I did gain a lot of balance and timing and coordination and flexibility. Like the traditional training, like the warm-ups are basically taken from yoga. And so very good for flexibility and mobility. And then they do work you quite hard. Like it is a good workout. It's not related to real fighting, but simply doing hundreds and thousands of kicks and punches and break falls and all the things they run you through are quite good for physical conditioning and for coordination and balance and things like that. So it wasn't a waste at all. And in fact, some people, and I've talked to Matt Thornton and other people about this, some of the people who go straight into jiu-jitsu with nothing to compare it to and nothing to contrast it with don't value it as much as the first generation people who discovered it in contrast to the less functional things they had been doing, right? So it's a net positive having done all that, because I did learn a lot about my body, and I do value jiu-jitsu more, I think, because I can compare it to what I did before.
And we had Matt on the show. We had several SPG guys on the show. So this story, even though different character is in the center of it, but it feels like the story almost repeats for every single person, no matter where you come, no matter which side of the world you find yourself. Anybody coming from this traditional background, traditional martial arts background, says the same thing. Jiu-jitsu is by far more applicable, yet there are lessons to be learned from the other things it's not that we don't have them in jiu-jitsu. They are just largely emphasized in taekwondo, karate, even traditional wrestling, or, these other martial arts or sports that have existed for hundreds of years longer than what we are experiencing in jiu-jitsu. Do you think that the success of average person is higher or steeper, this learning curve, when they have exposure to the other martial arts or sports? Or they are coming with a fresh mind. I've never done any of this, and I'm starting jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, potentially so. So I've had my own experience, and I've talked to instructors who are senior to me, especially Brazilians in America, about people who come to jiu-jitsu from wrestling or judo, and they tend to be very good white belts and very good blue belts because they have a strong background in grappling. And of course, there are exceptions. There are these people who fully embrace jiu-jitsu, and they become nightmares. They become so good if they have judo and they have wrestling, but they kind of put it aside and really learn jiu-jitsu and only combine the judo and the wrestling when they fight, and when they need it, but not when they train with other white belts and blue belts. Those people become extremely scary. But the majority of people are too focused on winning rather than learning. And so they use their wrestling and they use their judo. And then they're really good white belts and blue belts. They tend to top out at purple belt. They start tying with their peers at purple belt. And by brown and black belt, they're getting annihilated because they just don't have the technical skill to keep up with a real jiu-jitsu brown belt or real jiu-jitsu black belt. And they most often quit. So that's one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is more like me. I didn't come from wrestling or judo. Came from more striking martial arts, and even some like fake grappling martial arts like Aikido. The principles that they've been taught are very valuable. A lot of the principles apply directly to jiu-jitsu. The training methods are what's wrong. So yeah, if you come out of a traditional martial art and you've embraced these principles of relaxation and using your partner's energy against him or her, and all of these things, and you want to do that, but you really never learned how because everything was so choreographed. Yeah, then jiu-jitsu, those people do. I know people from Aikido and Kung Fu and who get good at jiu-jitsu quite quickly because it's what they were looking for all along. And they were waiting for a chance to kind of embody these principles, but their former martial art didn't allow them to do that. So it's sort of the opposite of wrestling judo. Wrestling and judo guys, they're already really tough, but that kind of retards them in the long run. And the people who come out of traditional martial arts usually aren't that tough day one, but their willingness to embrace the principles and embody the principles makes them get good faster at jiu-jitsu.
You're right. That conversation takes place quite frequently, not only at my academy, but also as I talk to different instructors all around the country and world, is if you have a wrestler coming into jiu-jitsu, they have the knowledge base of grappling, and then oftentimes they can out-grapple white belt and blue belts. Like they can mop the floors with them. But the moment somewhere around that purple belt, the higher blue belt, purple belt, there's this pivot point that takes place where the skills they had are not enough to hang any longer. And this is where this ego check comes in oftentimes. I've been winning for all these years, and now, boom, it just happens. And it's not enough. And oftentimes, at least I tell my guys, is if you are able to put the skills from wrestling, judo, and the skills that you have aside and really learn jiu-jitsu, in a year, 2 or 3, you're going to be a really scary individual. And this is why I'm so nice to you right now, because I know I don't want to be underneath you then, okay? Because you'll take the jiu-jitsu skills and the smashing and forward motions of wrestling, and I just have a bad day.
Yeah. That's really wise of you. I do that with the 15 and 16-year-olds too. I'm super nice to them because I know, they're 16. They've already been training for 6-7 years. Yeah. And I can still beat them, but I'm like, you're going to turn 21.
Oh yeah.
When I turn 60, and I'm like, I want you to have good memories of me. I don't want to be on your revenge list when
That's
you're
right.
a 21-year-old black belt, right?
That's right. Just remember, I was always nice to you.
Yeah.
But isn't it interesting how these different worlds, from a skill set, tradition, and just environment perspective, they bleed? And today, oftentimes, we all meet on the mat in a jiu-jitsu environment, and we can really identify some of these individuals. Like, yeah, I mean, clearly he's done something before. It's clearly embedded in the chemistry of movement and balance and just ability and agility and so on. You know, even though he might not know jiu-jitsu, like, I can see the potential there.
Yes, 100%.
Mind-blowing how all of this is building all together. So 98, you stumble upon jiu-jitsu. Your mind is open.
89, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry, 89. My apologies, 89.
Yeah, that's good.
Your world is pivoting into the direction. Handful years later, you stumble upon Rickson. Is that by design or coincidental that you meet Rickson? As
100% by design. What happened was, as soon as I experienced jiu-jitsu in 89, luckily, this is way before the UFC, but Harriott was selling his VHS tapes, in Black Belt magazine.
I remember those.
So I was living in Korea, and I bought all his tapes, and I got some friends who were also, doing other martial arts, and we were training. So not ideal, nothing like being at the Gracie Academy, but better than nothing. And Harriott did a good job. He's a great teacher, and he did a good job of making those tapes both extremely clear and also extremely simple. He wasn't trying to teach anything complicated. And at that time, I already had I had more than a decade of other martial arts practice. And so I could, figure out, he was a great teacher and I had a little bit of previous knowledge. So it wasn't that hard to follow along with the very most basic concepts. And so I was able to do that for about the next 3 years. And then as soon as I graduated, I, packed up all my stuff. And so I didn't stumble upon Rickson. I was asking all my friends in America about the Gracie Academy. And it was just about the time that Rickson had broken away and opened that first school on Pico Boulevard. And the people I trusted, the other martial artists and the people who had been to a couple seminars and stuff, all said, go to Rickson. Don't go to Gracie Academy. So I trusted them. There were guys I knew, and they had been to Rickson seminars and stuff. And this is UFC 1, but pre-Rickson's fighting in Japan. So Rickson wasn't that famous. Only the people who already kind of knew jiu-jitsu knew who he was. But luckily, I had a bunch of friends in martial arts back here in California. And so I just went straight to Rickson. Yeah.
Before we get to Rickson, I want you to give me a visual of those VHS tape viewing sessions wherever you guys were doing, because I'm imagining, first of all, he had several subsets of these self-defense instructionals. Harriott there is, right? And each of them had several tapes. So do you guys have a library of things and you're pulling?
No, I think I was early enough to where I just had that first, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu basics or whatever. Later, he did have intermediate, and after that, some women's self-defense and stuff for police officers and different things. But the ones I remember, it was just Harriott and Hoist, and it was the basic holding mount, escaping mount, holding cross-side.
So who is there?
Escaping cross-side, that thing, holding guard, passing guard.
Who is there during these sessions?
In the tape or with me?
No, with you. With you.
Oh, no, just other martial artists living in Korea that I invited. Hey, do you want to work on this with me? And a few open-minded people were yeah, that sounds cool. And we were just doing it. Yeah.
And what's the response within the room as you guys are exploring this new thing?
Yeah. So the people who were doing it with me, their response was good because they were already open-minded enough to do it and to know that it was good. And then in the middle of all this, UFC 1 happened. And I said, let's watch it. And everyone who wasn't really hip to jiu-jitsu was sure that one of those bodybuilder looking guys was going to win everything. And I was just no, Hoist is going to win. And they were all really shocked when he won, but I was not shocked. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of self-selecting. I mean, I think to better answer your question, of course, the vast majority of people were either not interested at all, or more often they were already doing other martial arts and were like, well, I would do this and I would counter with that. In the early days, no one can take me down. I'll just side kick you and you can't get near me. All of the fallacies that existed before UFC 1. And guess what? You guys are on 163, but what's the UFC on? I don't check. Like 200 something, 300 something,
360 something, 390 something. They're up there.
But ironically, there's still hundreds of millions of people whose thinking hasn't changed since UFC 1. I mean, they still are like, no one can take me to the ground. I would eye jab you. I would bite you.
And even if you go back to those first 5 or first 3 UFCs, if you look at the simplicity of what Royce has done,
yes.
It like today, even looking in a retrospect, and that having the knowledge base of what we have and the experience that we have of jiu-jitsu, it doesn't get more basic than that. Front kick, penetration, established to control, take him to the ground and beat the crap out of him. I mean, and like even if you look at some of the older, Chris Howder talked about this, like these in academy, what do they call it?
Dojo stores?
The dojo stores. Challenge matches, exactly.
Matches, yeah.
Exactly, right? They didn't even strike each other. It was just like slaps, just to, it showed the domination of the position. Right? I mean, it's the simplicity of this. And I think this is where the brilliance of Harriott and the crew came in. Don't make this complicated. This needs to be simple. This needs to be raw and very appealing. And I think our human brains did the rest of the work.
Yeah. Luis, when I was getting my blue belt, Rickson when I was at Rickson's, I'd only see him about twice a week because he was fighting professionally.
Yeah.
And like any professional fighter, he had to be selfish with his time and with his energy. Everyone understood that. Everyone was rooting for him. And he would like ride his bike from home to get kind of an aerobic workout. And he would come in a couple times a week. And he wouldn't take over the class if Luis was teaching, but he would walk around and give a little advice, and stuff. And if he got there early enough, he would teach. And then sometimes afterwards he would line up, 30 people and roll with them just to get a little more of a workout. But Luis said to us, a few of us when we were getting our blue belts, he said, and this goes back to what you said about the early UFCs, how simple they were. He said, okay, you're getting your blue belt. Congratulations. He said, white to blue belt, at least, under Rickson and like original Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, you're learning how to fight. And what he's like, you're learning how to fight other people. Now, I mean, when I say other people, non-jiu-jitsu people. And this was UFC, right? It wasn't jiu-jitsu against jiu-jitsu like a tournament. It was jiu-jitsu against the world. And he said, look, if you have a blue belt from us, from Rickson, it's like unless you are unlucky enough to meet like an Olympic judoka or like a college D1 wrestler, it's like basically 99% of people, it's like you're already going to win in a fight against a non-jiu-jitsu person. And everything you do, purple, brown, black, is just because you love jiu-jitsu, right? If you just wanted to like win a bar fight, you're done. Like you have enough after getting a blue belt here. And purple belt, brown, black, you love jiu-jitsu and you want to test your jiu-jitsu against another person who knows what you're doing. Because if they don't know what you're doing, if you watch Royce, in the first few UFCs, they don't even try to defend what he's doing. Dan Severn thinks he's winning as he taps to a triangle choke, right? Yeah. They didn't even know what it was. So, you don't need that much against those guys who don't even understand what you're doing to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the simplicity that I was talking about. It's almost naive in a sense. Like it's just, it's so easy, so simple. And yet all of this evolves over the next couple decades, and we have consequences of today, having, first of all, great opportunities like this to pick your brain and get a piece of the history. Hey, listen, when you are with Rickson over there at his academy, do you have a comprehension who you're surrounded by?
You mean the whole academy or Rickson himself?
Well, both. I mean, many consider Rickson as the best of the best of the best ever lived, right? As a pioneer of not only of
that's why I went,
but also of the sport of grappling, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I went. I believed that at the time. I still believe it today. I know some people who doubt it. No one who's ever actually rolled with him doubts it. It's all the people who haven't. So that tells you something right there. Yeah, I mean, I went there for him. Obviously, Luis, who's now in Maui, was running the academy day to day, and I probably had the most classes with him. Mauricio Costa and Jason Krikorian were there also at the time, and they taught on and off. I mean, they taught their own schedule, but I tended to be at Luis's classes. I knew they were all good. And those two, when I started, Jason and Mauricio were only purple belts, but purple belt then is like second, third degree black belt now in terms of like, wow, that's really high up, right? And Luis was a brown belt. Rickson was the only black belt at the whole academy. But brown belt back then too was like incredibly high because you've been training a decade or more, and he was just like to me it was all magic, right? And then there were Rickson had a name value obviously even before he fought in Japan, but while I was there he fought in Japan, and so that made him even more famous. More people started coming in. You had the challenge matches back then, so I was surrounded by people who believed and people who didn't believe, right? But yeah, I mean, I mean, I would have a better understanding of. Go ahead.
I was about to ask: was there a particular event that sticks out in your mind as, and you're smiling, so I assume one popped in your mind, but
a few
of those believer versus non-believer situations when you experience this.
Rickson. The stories about Rickson everyone knows. I think most people know all of those stories, but I got a good story about Luis because I spent more time with him. There was this big guy, Italian guy, and he'd obviously done a lot of martial arts, and he thought he was tough, and he was tough. But Luis is small. I don't apologize if I get it wrong, but maybe 5'7", 5'8", 155, 160. So, in LA with all these like bodybuilders running around, he was not a big man. And we were doing I remember we were doing headlock escapes, and this guy was big, like bodybuilder looking guy, long blonde hair, looked kind of like Fabio, the model, not the jiu-jitsu Fabio. And Luis told him, he's a big guy, so it's like, yeah, put me in a headlock. And Luis gave him his head and neck, right? And usually people know to kind of go light because he's trying to demonstrate and talk. It's not like fighting, right? You have to talk to the other 30 people, and you can't have your voice being crushed like this, while you're trying to talk. But this guy just tried to kill him. And Luis is in front of 30 of his students, so he has to act like it's not hard, but we can all tell it's really hard because he gave this 220-pound guy all the connection and elements that he needed, and the guy took advantage of it. And so it took him a few tries, climb, go belly down, climb, go belly down. And finally, like on the third or fourth try, he escaped. And, he's very Brazilian. So, his displeasure was very palpable. Like he was very angry, and I knew he was angry. But he's also very professional. He's teaching a class. So he's like, okay, guys, practice. And he's acting like he's not mad, but I can tell he's mad. And then the next thing started happening, and he was smart enough to grab someone else instead of this guy. But the guy said something like, that won't work, or, no. And Luis was already at the breaking point. And he just said, he said, okay, you obviously have a problem. You obviously want to fight. He's like, come here, we're gonna fight. It was just like that. And we just circled around them, and they squared up. And the guy wanted it. Obviously, Luis was correct, right? And the guy just squared up, put his hands up, and kicked Luis really hard in the leg. And I was like, oh, geez, I hope this doesn't go poorly. And Luis just mirrored and just kicked him right back in the leg like a mirror. But the difference was this guy thought it was going to be a kickboxing match, and Luis just shot and took him down and mounted him. And he pulled his hand back, and I was like, oh, no, this is not Brazil, right? You could win this fight, but this guy goes to the police or his lawyer or whatever. And from up here, he just opened his hand and started slapping him, which was very wise. And then he was yelling at him, like, what do you want? Why are you here? Like, what do you want? Are you here to learn, or are you here to fight? And he goes, oh, okay. You know, I'm here to learn. And he's like, okay. And he got up and started teaching the class. I wasn't going to say anything about it, but the real funny thing is the next day, you know, Luis calls me into his office because I was there quite a lot. And I had quite a decent relationship with Luis. And he was kind of seriously apologizing to me, but also kind of happy that I saw it. Because he's like, yeah, John, man, I want to apologize to you. Like, things got out of hand yesterday. That's not really the most professional way to teach a class. But then he also kind of like grinned a little bit, like, but you saw me take care of business. And I said, yeah. And I said, hey, no need to apologize to me. I saw everything. He was asking for it. And then, you gave it to him. And he's like, okay, just want to make sure. Yeah.
Did that guy ever come back?
I don't think I saw him because they're not there to learn, right?
Yeah.
They think jiu-jitsu is bullshit. You know, I did karate for 20 years. This guy's 5'7", 155 pounds. Look at all my muscles. You know, all the things that go on in their head.
Yeah. It was a different world back then, at least.
Yeah.
This is, you are talking about 10 years before I started. So this is, you know, I think the evolution of the art, that's number one, but also the society awareness to what jiu-jitsu is has changed over the last 3 decades significantly, right? I can't even imagine. I mean, maybe somewhere around the world there's still freaking matches in the dark basements. Who the hell knows? But that definitely, you know, we've had quite few guests, including Chris Howder and everybody else talking about it. You know, all these challenge matches that were taking place, you know, at the academy on weekly basis. So it's great to hear some of those stories. When you're looking back, you know, 4 decades. Yeah, 4 decades.
I'm on 29 years now. This year was 29 years.
I was counting all of it.
But if you count when I first was exposed, yes, that's more like 35 years.
Yeah. So all this time, wherever you put the brackets, that's a lot of exposure, a lot of knowledge. If you were to point out one thing that you really took away from all of these experiences, whether it's Hawaii, that one moment where you got introduced to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or perhaps something even earlier, more traditional, meeting Rickson himself, or even that event you just talked about, witnessing that challenge match, whatever it might be, what would be the one thing that you took away the most?
I think the biggest blessing of beginning with Rickson, and which is of course him as an individual and like, basically the preeminent jiu-jitsu person, I think, ever, was the complete belief in, the trust in, and reliance on technique. Rickson, when you look at him in his prime, obviously he's physically very gifted, but still on his biggest, heaviest day, I don't think he ever broke 190 pounds, even when he looked really imposing, he's under 6 feet tall. He's relatively thin, even though he's muscular. I think he probably topped out about 190, 185. And Luis, Mauricio, and Jason were all more like 155, and they were running the school. Jason was maybe 160, Luis 155, Mauricio 150. Small guys, especially for like, LA and all these big guys running around. And so there was this insistence upon and belief in technique over everything else. And how else would Luis at 155 pounds handle some 220-pound brawler, right? Not by trying to be stronger than him, right? So I kind of internalized that and believed in it. And everywhere I went after that, because I moved to Boston for graduate school. So purple, brown, black was from Roberto Maia at Boston Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And he's a great instructor too, but I had that belief from day one that, you know, the technique of jiu-jitsu is most important, and that's what's going to save you. Because even if you are, I don't know, lucky or unlucky enough to be big and strong today, wait 20 years, right? Wait 40 years, wait 50 years. All of that is perishable, right? The only thing that is not going to decline with age is your technical knowledge and your technical ability. Everything else will decline with age.
I feel like that notion of technique is superior to everything else is slowly fading away with the athletic approach to jiu-jitsu today. Why do you think that a lot of individuals today, they substitute that precision of a technique with the physical attributes?
Sure. So in sport jiu-jitsu, which in a sense, this is a distinction that was first mentioned to me by Henry Akins. I want to give Henry Akins credit. And I think it's a very valid distinction that everyone doing jiu-jitsu needs to be conscious of. What the IBJJF is doing is valuable and beautiful. And what Abu Dhabi and Eddie Bravo Invitational and Fight to Win, Gordon Ryan and these awesome athletes are doing, no-gi primarily, is also incredible. It's driving the sport forward, and they're incredible, but it's all submission grappling. So Henry makes a distinction between jiu-jitsu and submission grappling, because if you can sit on your butt in butterfly guard for 5 minutes chasing someone around the mat and they don't decide to front kick you in the teeth, you're doing submission grappling, not jiu-jitsu. In jiu-jitsu, even if I choose not to strike as a jiu-jitsu person, let's say I'm very gracious and I just want to take someone down and gently put them to sleep, they could punch me at any time, right? They could elbow me at any time. They could kick me at any time. So a lot of the things that are happening in the IBJJF and a lot of things that are happening in the major no-gi organizations are, in my opinion, and from Henry, is we need to call that submission grappling, because jiu-jitsu includes everything, right? And so once you go into submission grappling and there's no striking, including headbutts, there's no chance of a weapon being presented, and also you have belt levels and age levels and skill levels. So it's like we're both purple belts. We're both under 30 years old. We're both within 5 or 10 pounds of each other. What's, strength and speed become very decisive factors, because all the other things have been artificially eliminated, right? You can't be older than me. You can't be younger than me by too many years. You can't be too much heavier or lighter than I am. You can't be too much ahead of me in your belt level. And so then it's like, well, I'm way stronger than you. That's going to be very decisive, right? Because all the other factors have been evened out by the organization. But that's not what originally what it was. Is Luis at 150 pounds and this guy who's intruding at 220 pounds. And no matter how much Luis would have practiced the bench press, instead of refining his takedown to mount, it wouldn't have helped him, because he would have tried to bench press that guy. The guy would have thrown him into the wall, So in real jiu-jitsu, I think you have to assume, let's put it this way, no 105-pound woman ever challenged Luis, right? The people who are going to bully you are the ones who think that they're going to have an easy time with you. And usually that means they're bigger, stronger, younger, faster, or whatever. And so the only thing under your control is technique. Like, if this person wants to punch me, that's not under my control. This person weighs 250 pounds, not under my control. If this person has a friend that's going to jump in, not under my control. So to kind of focus on things that are wildly variable and uncontrollable is not really as productive as just refining what you can do, which is the technical aspect of jiu-jitsu.
I really appreciate you saying all of this, because at times you overhear conversations between, students, especially at the very beginning of their journey, as when they solving a problem or training or troubleshooting, and they say, this is not legal. And then thought comes to their mind, well, if I can slap you in your face, nobody's going to say on the street that wrist locks are not applicable, or I cannot choke you or punch you, or you have a knife or not, right? So, but again, it kind of all bridges back to the point of the rules of engagement. We adopt our actions to what we are surrounded by. And if you look at some of these tournaments that you mentioned a moment ago, these organizations, there is a safety net around them intentionally for some of these things to happen. You don't see anybody coming with a knife to, EBI. It just doesn't happen, right? At the same time, if we look at this big umbrella of jiu-jitsu as an art, all of that is all inclusive, right? We're talking about street, we're talking about striking, we talk about weight differences, we talk about size differences, we can talk about gender differences. All of those attributes will play a role. So how do you protect yourself, right?
Correct. I like what you say about the rules too, because if somebody wanted to change jiu-jitsu in a certain direction, it's simple. You just change the rules. So right now, jiu-jitsu people, on average, there are exceptions, on average have very poor takedowns. Mm-hmm. But if the IBJJF tomorrow, and they change the rules all the time, these rules, these so-called, like, that's illegal. You always said that's illegal. It's like, is that like, did Moses bring that down as another commandment? Is that the 11th commandment? I mean, does that come from God? It's just people, Carlos Gracie Jr. Yeah. They call it a federation, but it's a corporation. It's his company. He owns it. It's his company. So he makes a rule, or they make a rule, and then it's like, oh, that's illegal. But where it's not. It's only in that little game where it is. Mm-hmm. But if the IBJJF tomorrow said, if you sit to guard, -4 points, and if you get a takedown +4 points in 1 year, jiu-jitsu people would be awesome at takedowns.
Everybody would
you can totally.
Everybody would be hiring judo instructors.
Yeah, you can totally manipulate the game you want through the rules.
Yeah. We had a Chris Bones. I don't know if you're familiar, if you know Chris Bones, but he trained with Rickson quite a bit, and he's in Australia now. He just moved, and he talked about it quite a bit. Is if you look at jiu-jitsu itself, it's removing all these limitations, and now it becomes it's jiu-jitsu as its most raw form that it possibly can be, right? And it all boils down to the simple principles: balance, weight distribution, distance control. Like if you can comprehend and understand those, you really have a strong entry into what jiu-jitsu really is, and you can solve a lot of those problems. Man, that was deep.
Notice
Gary's silence.
So what needs to be called something else then? Everything but jiu-jitsu and what it was? Or because Thomas said an umbrella, right? And I don't know if I like that analogy, because I don't know if that other stuff belongs under the umbrella. Should it be somewhere else?
Right. So I think, submission grappling for no-gi, sport jiu-jitsu for gi. Yeah. You're talking about sport jiu-jitsu, and that's wonderful. And submission grappling is a sport. Yeah. And again, I don't want people to misunderstand me. Those athletes, just like a college wrestler is going to do fine. Most college wrestlers are going to do fine in a street fight. Mm-hmm. They've never thought about it. They don't put gloves on and try to punch each other. But they're so efficient that good luck punching them more than once before you're on your back, right? And so these sport jiu-jitsu guys, a lot of them, they're strong, they're fast, they're flexible, they're technical, good balance. They have good timing. They eat right, they sleep right, they train hard. A lot of them are lifting weights, doing yoga. They're going to be just fine too. In most self-defense situations. But what they're doing. What they're doing with each other is sports jiu-jitsu. And there will also be some of those guys who, I like Jean-Jacques and I like Saulo, but if you go back, I've been doing this a long time and watching with great interest how jiu-jitsu guys do when they enter MMA. Marcelo too. Marcelo was a little more artificial, but all three of them, I think, basically lost to knees to the face or kicks to the face. Jean-Jacques, I very much remember he tried to do sit-up guard, kind of a shin-to-shin type sit-up guard on one leg. And I think it was Frank Trigg with the other leg, kneed him right in the face. Game over. Saulo, I remember he got kicked in the face, maybe Yuki Kondo, I forget. He was fighting a Japanese guy. He got kicked in the face, and it wasn't a very hard kick. He went down, but instead of doing a technical stand-up with, and moving backwards, he started getting up, on forward. And then he got mauled and knocked out. And he should have fallen to his back and waited till he could do a technical stand-up and gain space. And Marcelo actually was a little artificial because he got to the back and the round ended. So, the rules of the sport made him leave that back position and then start round 2 from standing. And then he got kneed in the face trying to clinch again, and he lost. So these are 3 of the best guys to ever do jiu-jitsu, ever. And all of them got kneed in the face because of sport jiu-jitsu habits,
Yeah, and again, acknowledging what rules you are entering is the key, right? Like you no longer playing jiu-jitsu. You're playing jiu-jitsu and other things. And I think
yes,
this is the evolution that continues taking place, as all of this is moving forward over now and into the future. John, we've been at this for over an hour.
Awesome.
What we typically do, what a great conversation! I'll tell you, this is great. I love this. But what we do at the end of every episode, we have a question for you from our previous guest. However,
great.
He didn't know that you will be answering the question. So he kind of think about it as he asked the question completely in blind, knowing there will be a next guest after him.
Sure.
So Gary is going to take a lead on that, and then always interesting conversation ending to the episode.
Yeah, and I think we touched on this a little bit, and I think that it'll be nice to get a little deeper. But this is from Charles Harriott, and he wants to know, what do you consider the fundamentals of jiu-jitsu, and what is the first thing that you teach to a brand new student?
Yeah. So the fundamentals of jiu-jitsu for me, there's a lot of ways to answer this, but the brief answer is it's more like base and posture than any technique. Because if you understand, you won't learn it in one day, but you can understand the importance of it in one day. And I would add breathing to that. I would say, you're breathing, because that's going to lead, if you can't breathe, you make yourself tired. You don't even need your opponent to make you tired. So breathing, base and posture and connection and in these types of things. They're not techniques, but they're fundamentals, because without them, either the techniques won't work at all, or they'll be very, very inefficient, or at least less efficient than possible. And we're looking for maximum efficiency. So I would, there might be a lesson, there might be like, okay, we're going to do like, UPA, we're going to do like a trap and roll from mount, or, maybe we're going to talk about maintaining closed guard, something very fundamental that anyone could do on their first day. But I would start the lesson standing, and I would talk about breathing, base, posture, connection, because whether you're standing or on the ground, top, bottom, winning, losing, if you don't understand how to control your breath and how to establish base, posture, and connection, it's like flipping a coin. You flip a coin and it's, it's 50-50 every time. Even if I flip a coin and it goes heads, 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 the chances of it being tails are still 50-50, right? It's every time you flip that coin, it's 50-50. And jiu-jitsu should not be 50-50. Like, oh, I got lucky, I won, I got unlucky, I lost. It should be repeatable, right? Like all good science is repeatable. It's like, oh, this worked one time, therefore it's a new scientific theory. No, you can do it 100 times and you're going to try to make it fail. But if it doesn't fail, or it fails, 1 or 2% of the time, but succeeds 98% of the time, then you have a new theory, which would be equivalent of a new jiu-jitsu technique. But what's going to allow, and that could, like I said, jiu-jitsu is infinite. It's just the possibilities are infinite. And so we want to practice the things that are constant and that are finite. And I think that is breathing, base, posture, connection. Yeah.
Perfect.
You have mentioned science and theory multiple times throughout the conversation today. Do you find jiu-jitsu as a scientific train of thought?
I think approaching it, people should approach it however it makes sense to them. Some people are more artistic and some people are more kind of like engineering minded. I think approaching it however it makes sense to you and however it makes it fun to you, because the only real secret to jiu-jitsu is keep doing it, right? You have to stay healthy and you have to stay motivated.
Yeah.
So if you're getting injured, you're never getting good at jiu-jitsu, I promise. If you're not motivated, you're never getting good at jiu-jitsu. So, whatever keeps you injury-free and motivated to train as often as possible is the right answer. But I think approaching it like science is helpful in not believing things without evidence and really trying to disprove hypotheses before you kind of codify them into a theory or a technique is super important, just to keep everyone honest. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that approach. I mean, testing, continuous testing and evolution, and then adaptation to what your discoveries are. I mean, that's essentially that's troubleshooting 101, right? This is what we're doing. The moment we gain, it happens for different people different ways, but it's somewhere around that blue belt, right? Where we have enough knowledge to start troubleshooting on our own. We feel that power in our hand, and creativity just begins to flourish. And then we start doing flying triangles and getting airborne and
not me.
inverting in directions the instructors tell us not to invert in.
I'm getting the cross side and I'm staying there. That's all I want.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have one more thing, because you've talked about inverting.
Yeah.
And I teach and train mostly in Korea. I mean, I'm lucky enough in winters and summers to come back and do seminars in the US, but like my day-to-day training and teaching is in Korea. And in general, there are many exceptions, but the Koreans tend to be both a little bit smaller than the average American and a little bit more flexible and mobile than the average American. And so they like barren blows, they like inverting, they like doing a lot of that stuff. And they can do it. But I learned from a non-jiu-jitsu teacher once, a teacher of another subject. And he said this to me, and it applies perfectly to jiu-jitsu. He said, the most important, one of the most important things you can learn to distinguish is to distinguish between what you can do and what you should do. Mm-hmm. Right? So you can do that, but I can guarantee you it might happen tomorrow and it might happen in 10 years. I can guarantee you it's going to cause you problems. Anatomically, we are meant to support weight on our feet, not on the back of our neck. You're not supposed to be upside down with your whole body weight kinking your neck, So, it's possible, but that doesn't mean it's desirable. And I think, original jiu-jitsu is also that, like, it is self-defense. And so, it doesn't make sense to become the best sport jiu-jitsu person in the world while ruining your body, because it's backwards. Like, self-defense should start with you protecting your body. You don't even need someone to mug you or attack you if you blow out both your knees and you blow out both your shoulders and you ruin your neck. You've already mugged yourself, basically.
No, but you bring up a really good point, and I think now we are noticing in the last few years and the next few years going forward, we are noticing this third and fourth generation of jiu-jitsu athletes. And I treat them as the original U.S. professional, semi-professional athletes. The ones who are breaching into their mid-30s now. Mm-hmm. Their competition is not their priority anymore, and yet the amount of injuries they are recovering from is at the highest peak. And you can see this everywhere, from Meow Brothers to many others, Brazilian and non-Brazilians. But this is the time where their body is paying the price for all of that pounding they have introduced when they were 16, 18, 21, and so on, you know? So I hope I know we're getting smarter, but I do hope that intelligence within the athletic jiu-jitsu spikes up, and we really put a lot of emphasis on how to take care of our bodies, because it is a shame that somebody who is 30, 35 has a difficulty walking. I mean, that is really...
I fully agree with you for myself, but I will say in their defense that it's not any different with a pro football player.
Yeah, it crosses all sports.
When you are a pro athlete, you just have, as long as your coach tells you, like if you go to a jiu-jitsu school, the problem with jiu-jitsu schools sometimes is the bait and switch. We're going to teach you self-defense. And then you go in and first day they're trying to teach you berimbolo. Yeah. So they're actually lying to you. But if you go into a school and they say, we train to become world champions, and to become a world champion, you're probably going to have to do a lot of steroids and have a few surgeries and be very uncomfortable from the time you're 30 till you die, like a pro football player. And you say, it's worth it to me. I want the gold medal. I want the money. Then it's okay. But you're just making a choice like a pro football player makes a choice. But if you're telling people we're teaching you self-defense and you're going to get healthier and all these things, then you have a problem.
I think the big difference that I would highlight in that topic is the fact with pro football players, there is an emphasis of we need to get your physical attributes where they need to go. We need to take care of your body. You need to not every session is pounding your face into the wall. In jiu-jitsu, that intelligence, I don't think is there yet. One, we don't have the resources for it. But two, the way how we train, it's all balls into the wall. We're going to train hard every day. And then who cares that we can't walk next morning? But we trained hard, you know?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. I think there are lessons from football. They want to play hard on Sunday.
Correct.
So Monday through Saturday, it's like, sauna and cold plunge and yoga and watch films and lift weights and stretch. And there's a lot of recovery built into it. Yeah.
Is that still true though for like the linemen? I think you do that with your position players. And I don't know. Yeah, because I feel like those guys are hitting each other every day. Right. But the quarterback, the running backs, the wide receivers, those guys are taking it a little bit more easy because Sunday is when they really need, they need to be healthy on Sunday.
I know. John,
but even a lineman, I mean, it's such a limited position. It's not like a running back who might break away for 90 yards. Mm-hmm. I don't see the drawback of letting them recover. They don't need to, on Monday morning, they don't need to be running 10 miles or,
I'm not saying that it should be that way. I'm just wondering if it has progressed for them yet.
Yeah. I don't know.
All I'm going to say is, did you notice the moment we stopped talking jiu-jitsu, Gary's talking now?
Why would I interrupt two guys that know so much more than me?
Hey,
why would I? No.
You're welcome to talk.
I know my role, man. I know where I'm at.
We always talk trash here, especially with Gary, so it's all good. John, listen, what a phenomenal conversation. We really do appreciate you being here. And as we're wrapping this up, if anybody wants to connect with you directly to you, where are you available on social media, websites? Where are you? Where are you at?
Facebook. I don't do a lot of social media, but I'm easy to find on Facebook. John Frankl, also John maybe _Frankl at Instagram. That's basically it. I'm pretty easy and pretty responsive.
No, that's appreciated because
let's put it this way, I don't have a Gordon Ryan inbox. If he gets 1,000 emails, I get 10, so I can handle it.
Listen, we appreciate it because sometimes we have a guest who says, "I'm on Instagram here, Facebook here, Twitter here, TikTok here, and this, and my website, and the list keeps going." No,
I'm pretty low key. Yeah.
But listen, on a serious note, we do appreciate your last 70 or so minutes with sharing your knowledge, your expertise, your experience on and off the mat. What a phenomenal conversation, Gary.
Yeah, thanks so much. We've had a run here of people talking about self-defense in jiu-jitsu, and I really appreciate it. So thanks for continuing that trend. I really enjoy it. So,
All right.
cool.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Let's wrap this up for today.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.